Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. As Turkey strengthens its influence across the Balkans, it faces both challenges and opportunities. From safeguarding citizens in Montenegro amid rising Turkophobia to driving regional investments that foster growth and stability. Yet, while Ankara's proactive diplomacy cements its position as a bridge between East and West, European skepticism persists, fueled by outdated narratives. Beyond the Balkans, the fragile Gaza ceasefire has once again been tested by deadly Israeli airstrikes, while Qatar's mediation opens a path towards a post-war Gaza. Joining me for the discussions today are Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator, Dr. Mehmet Çelik, and political analyst, Javed Rana.
Diplomatic engagement between Türkiye and Montenegro has gained momentum following a knife-related incident in Podgorica. Earlier this week, a man was injured during a physical altercation involving Turkish nationals in Podgorica. Montenegrin police took 45 people into custody following the incident and advised Turkish nationals to remain at home for their safety. A Turkish-run restaurant in central Podgorica was broken into and set ablaze on Sunday night. At one point, local police had to instruct some Turkish citizens to barricade themselves for protection. In a statement, the Montenegrin government said it will take all necessary measures to ensure the safety of approximately 14,000 Turkish citizens residing in the country, in accordance with the law. The government added that it will implement an accelerated visa issuance procedure for all Turkish nationals planning to arrive, stay, or transit through Montenegro, to minimize disruption. In a post on X, President Milanovic stated, "There must be no room for collective guilt or the stigmatization of an entire people." Montenegro needs a more responsible immigration policy, firm against abuses and crime, fair towards all who respect our laws, highlighting the Montenegrin government's commitment to upholding the rights of Turkish citizens in the country.
Welcome back to the program. Dr. Mehmet Çelik, Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Umar.
Dr. Mehmet, what's exactly happening in Montenegro right now? We know that there were clashes. A group of Turkish and Azerbaijani, they're saying there was a group which attacked Montenegrins in the capital city. And now Turkophobia is rising. There are actions. The government has taken actions against Turkish citizens. They've also stopped the visa-free regime that was in place. Tell me about this incident, Mehmet. Let's start with that.
Well, Umar, this incident is not one that we can just pinpoint to one reason, saying this is the actual cause of this clash or conflict that emerged in the very recent days. At the surface value, it seems like this is just a sole incident that happened, and then there's backlash against the incident, and you know, the things escalated afterwards. But it's a very complicated situation, first of all. One is that we need to understand how many Turks are in Montenegro right now. We need to understand how they are coming there. We need to understand how the Montenegrin government have created policies or narratives against the incoming to cover for certain lack of, let's say, economic policies or social policies. We need to look at how the EU puts Montenegro in a corner vis-a-vis the Turks that are coming into Montenegro without a visa regime, basically. Right now, any Turks that, actually prior to this incident, any Turk that held a passport that was valid for 180 days, they were able to stay there for 90 days. So the 180-90-day rule was applying for Turkish citizens that wanted to go and visit Montenegro. That is actually temporarily suspended at the moment after this unfortunate incident. When we look at Turkey and Montenegro, or in general the Balkans, Turkish influence is very largely and very widely visibly seen in the region. not only through bilateral relations in the sense of political or economic relations, but Turkey has also invested a lot in terms of development aid cooperation too. So through our Turkey's TİKA, the development agency, Turkey has made a lot of investment in that sense. But when we look at this, the events that have unfolded in the past few days, first of all, no one can justify or applaud any incident that is violent and leads to, let's say, stabbing somebody or violently attacking somebody. These are all things that happen almost in every country in day-to-day operation. But none of these incidents turn into widespread attacking of one ethnic group within a country, going and burning or attacking their shops, and that stigmatizing one ethnicity or one group of people within a country. I mean, violent accidents or let's say things that disrupt social order happen across many different European countries every single day, not just by one ethnic group, but by individuals, and the individuals are held accountable. So this incident, when we look at it from a face value, we see that there is an incident that there was a stabbing, and then all of a sudden there is actually large protest, and it turns into a violent against the Turks in the country. When I say it's a hard one to answer, it's because there is a story. I mean, there's two sides to a story usually, but with this one, there's more than two sides. First of all, it is something that we need to, I think, acknowledge that this one sole incident is not the only reason. As far as what we have, what we've seen, what we've followed in the media about incidents that happen related to the Turks or other communities in Montenegro. This is not the sole incident that happened by individuals coming into the country and carrying out, let's say, something that is unwanted. But this still doesn't mean that everyone, I mean, there's 13,000 people in a country of 600,000, 13,000 Turkish people, and there's a lot of Turks that go back and forth. Now, of course, in a regime where you have no restricted visa restrictions, it's easy for people to travel back and forth, and at times it is possible that certain individuals will not be as normal as others. They can have tendencies to commit violence or something that is illegal. And this happens with every country, with every nationality, basically. But I think the fact that when the country is so small and the incoming people are, let's say, committing some crimes, and the government then fails to address these, then an ethnicity, a group can be used as a scapegoat to cover for these lack of policies. A good immigration policy may be needed. A good economic policy may be needed. A social integration policy may be needed. When the government is lacking all these, then it is easy to blame the visa regime, basically saying, we shouldn't allow people in. No, you can still allow people in, but you need to have a proper measure, economic, social, political, and also in terms of your internal affairs, legal steps must be there to prevent these incidents or to minimize them. You cannot 100% prevent them, but to minimize them. This is, again, the two sides of the story. But I think in the bigger picture, as a country that wants to join the EU, the European Union, Montenegro is under a lot of pressure from not just the European Union against the Turks being able to come in, against their visa regime that is largely, to a certain degree, much easier or free for the Turks compared to other countries. They want to make sure that they tighten that from the European side. This is another side, again. But there's also rumors, or not rumors, but reports that a lot of this narrative is also constructed through defamation or disinformation from the Serbian side.
From the Serbians, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
From the Serbian side through Telegram channels and media reports. The narrative, I think, has a lot to do with how the masses have responded to this latest incident. In order for masses to mobilize against these things, against incidents as such, there needs to be another force that is pushing the masses. Just one sole incident is not enough. And I will give you an example from the Syrians in Turkey, for example. We are hosting nearly 5 million Syrian refugees. Are they all crime-free? No, this is not the case. Just like many other nationalities commit crimes too. Individuals from different nationalities commit crimes too. But at one point in Turkey, after almost a decade, we had some uprisings or riots against the Syrians in Turkey. But this wasn't just an organic, we realized afterward, that wasn't an organic move against the others, the migrants or the refugees in Turkey. When we look at the social media, for example, how that is constructing that feeling or that tendency that excludes the other from the picture of a country, or stigmatize them, or make them look as if they're all criminals. We look at social media, we look at media reports, we look at the politicians' rhetoric, the words that they use to describe the others. Even the governments or other officials blaming their lack of policies on the incoming migrants. I think when we look at this incident in Montenegro, it's very similar to many other, let's say, stances against migrants in different countries. And Turkey was a very good example of that. You remember in Kayseri, there was a lot of unwanted issues that took place at the time, developments against Syrian refugees or Syrian migrants in Turkey. But these are not organic moves, I think, steps by the masses. Like their organization needs something more sophisticated than just something that evolves on its own. For this reason, when we look at the Montenegro situation, we see that, of course, there is a stabbing. This is a fact, right? Although we don't know the details about it, why, and etc. But it's a fact that many Turks are able to go in. It is also a fact that there is the Serbia side, there is the European Union side vis-a-vis the Turks coming in. There is also the lack of policies by the host government, again, to be implemented to make sure the incoming visitors or residents of other countries are integrating or actually abiding by the rules, or there's the screening process is somehow in place. I think that is only justifiable and reasonable. But to stigmatize the people and make them look like as if they're all criminals and stop in the visa regime for all of them, I think this is a measure that it's like a blanket solution, and it covers, it will be treated as a step against the Turks rather than against criminals of any individuals, basically, or criminals of any nationality. Any nationality can, I think, individuals from any nationality can commit crimes. This is very, I think, normal. It's a known thing. But to say because some individuals have committed crimes, we will go and change the rules for everybody that belongs to that nationality or carry a passport of that country, then I would say there is more political reasons behind that rather than just to ensure safety and security of the host country residents. Of course, it's a small country and things can change and evolve very easily, but we should not forget that there's more than one side of the story, especially when it comes to some social and political and economic issues and events that lead, the movements of masses against one nationality.
Mehmet, let's talk about the Montenegrin government. Now, it's also pro-Serbia, that government. Serbia has issues with Kosovo, obviously because of the drones that Turkey has supplied to Kosovo. Serbia says that only KFOR, the NATO-led security force, should be supplied with the weapons that should be in charge of whatever is happening in Kosovo. What are Serbia's grievances? Because it's very obvious the Serbian president, he criticized the Turkish president as well. And then he said that I apologize for what I've said, and we know that Serbia is no match for Turkey. So tell me about this issue in the context of Serbia and Kosovo.
Well, first of all, I think after the war in the early 90s, the system that was brought into the divisions in the Balkans, although there is now sovereign countries and some are recognized and others are not recognized. For example, in the situation of Bosnia, there is a tripartite regime there, etc. But things are not settled in the Balkans. And I think the Balkans is Europe's quicksand in a way, because although there is sovereign states now, although there is clear borders now, but ethnic and religious and political instability is still very fragile and ready to be ready to be, I think, very easily turn into bigger flames. The fire has, of course, calmed down, but there is still some ashes that could turn into a big fire across Balkans in general. And for me, the Balkans is another area where bigger players are flexing their muscles. They did that. I mean, they are doing that in Ukraine right now. They keep doing that in Syria. Across Africa, this is happening between different players, right? And I think the Balkans is a very fragile place for that reason. I mean, when we look at Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia, Montenegro, because of their inability to have an autonomous foreign policy, given their size and given their material capability, given their political influence, they end up getting on the bandwagon of another bigger country. Turkey's influence is very seen and very known across the Balkans. But we should not forget that European Union on one side, the United States on the other side, and Russian influence is very, very competing with the others. When this is the case, I think what happens across the Balkans is the cornering of the smaller states and leaving them with almost no option but to become very hostile towards one another, right? Because given their economic instability, or let's say the need for investments from outside, these countries tend to rely on another bigger power. When that is the case, let's say the country A in the Balkans is pro-Russia because Russia supports them, then if the country B, and I'm precisely not using the names to not single out any other, but I think this is the case across the region, when country B is getting support from the United States or European Union, then they turn them into hostiles against one another. And at the very deep and root level, there is, of course, very ethnic and religious differences and sentiments that is very rigid and rival against one another. That ethnic and religious rivalry or competition or confrontation or even conflict has not settled in the Balkans, despite the fact that the war has ended nearly 3-4 decades ago. For that reason, there is still that tension that hasn't calmed down, and a small move can trigger something very big across the Balkans. That's the same thing with Albania, with Kosovo, with Montenegro, with Serbia, with the Bosnia. Even within Bosnia, things are not settled. The Dayton agreement did not solve anything. Right now, there is a country, for example, in Bosnia that is pretty much literally very dysfunctional. I mean, it's hard for them to make any sort of progress because of that the system that is there right now. And I think, ethnic and religious and even some, to a certain degree, political differences is pulling back the region from having some sort of autonomy, not only within each country, but a cooperation is also limited among these nations. Despite the fact that they have been, they suffered for a very long time from war and conflict, they are not able to get over that period and move on to have some sort of autonomy, to have some sort of economic progress and political cooperation.
Mehmet, you know what? That reminds me of what the European Union did earlier this year with Central Asian states. They paid them money, over $12 billion in new deals and infrastructure deals, economic development, and then they went on to recognize the Greek Cypriots. So this is similar. And today, the German Chancellor is going to be in Ankara. I want to ask you, Mehmet, the Turkish president, he's meeting European leaders, Macron, he has a good relationship with all of them. But then at the end, the EU comes and stabs Turkey in the back. And it has those double standards, visa restrictions, EU accession, all of those things, and now what we're seeing in the Balkans. So why is there this double standard?
Again, I mean, you're asking me $1 million question, Omar, because for over 6 decades, and since 1960s or late 50s, Turkey has been waiting to get into EU, basically, well, as we call it right now, European Union. To simply say it, Turkey is a big country with a big population. Turkey is a country that has a lot of differences in terms of cultural and religious mosaic.
Is religion the main factor here?
Religion is not the main factor. There's a lot of factors. At the very end of it, I think Turkey is a very young population compared to many of the European nations. Turkey is, in terms of population size, it's a very big country. In terms of the strength of political leadership, Turkey is a very different country than many of the European countries. What Europe wants from Turkey is a country that will do what it says, but never be able to join the EU. Turkey, the European Union wants Turkey to be a market for themselves, but not a country that will join the union to produce together. Turkey is a country that is very strong in terms of military capability, the second largest army in the NATO, but European Union wants a post along its southern flank of NATO, but it does not want to have Turkey as an equal partner. There is a lot of double standards at many different levels. I mean, when we look at this visa issue, I think we're no longer talking about it because it's like hitting a wall in front of you that you can't come across, because Europeans, they say that it's for this and that reason, but many, of course, acknowledge even that there is a lot of political motivations behind this visa regime. When we look at some of the historical remarks that actually came from some of the European Union individuals, we know that there's a lot of ideological blocks in front of European Union accepting Turkey as a member. And I think at the core of it is ideological. Then it comes out, of course, political, economic, and even religious factors that are stopping the EU from accepting Turkey as a member. Ideological barriers are hard to cross. And because the European Union does not let its guard down when it comes to a relationship with Turkey, especially a Turkey that does not just want to follow what the EU is saying, a Turkey that wants to have autonomy, Turkey that wants to have its citizens' interests are protected at different regions and geographies, then European countries come into a clash in terms of that interest. I mean, the fact that the whole union is held hostage by the Greek Cypriots and the Greek and by the Greece against Turkey when it comes to many decisions, that shows that that ideological barrier is actually built so high by even some of the smaller members of the country, or of the Union. I think it's a very strategic miscalculation that European Union has done when it comes to Turkey and how they position the new Turkey of the past 2 decades. It's no longer a Turkey that just waits at the door and at the mercy of European leaders. Turkey is very proactive in its region. Turkey is very active in terms of mediation of different conflicts around the world. Turkey's economic and military power has increased. Turkey's potential is actually being realized now, and this is something that I think, given that lack of that strategic vision by the European countries, makes the EU not see Turkey as a potential for themselves, rather than something, you know, they used to how they used to see Turkey, let's say 2 decades ago. That needs to change for the sake of Europe. At a world where it is no longer a bipolar world, when there is alternatives for Turkey, EU must strategize long-term interests for the Union, and Turkey must be part of that if they want security of the continent to be I think, protected against other threats, that is, however they describe them. Otherwise, Turkey has alternatives at the point, and this is why Turkey no longer faces westward. When the EU is turning its back, it can turn to other geographies. Because it has that ability, because it has that autonomy now when it comes to its foreign policy. Prior to 20 years ago, Turkey, of course, didn't have as much options available for itself. But now, the Europeans must have a strategic vision to bring their Turkey towards themselves. And I think this is what is happening lately when European leaders are cozying up to Turkey.
Let's see how that meeting goes today between Erdogan and German Chancellor Merz. Dr. Mehmet, thank you so much for that analysis. I'll be right back with you. Israel has erected nearly 1,000 new barriers across the occupied West Bank since 2023, severely restricting Palestinians' movement and daily life under tightened military control.
In the last 2 years, Israel has erected nearly 1,000 barriers in the occupied West Bank, restricting movement for Palestinians and severely hindering their lives, a local government body said. While Israel's military has long imposed movement and access constraints after capturing the West Bank in the 1967 Mideast War, the number of new barriers is unprecedented, residents say. According to the Wall and Settlement Resistance Commission, an official Palestinian governmental body, 916 gates, barriers and walls have been installed since the October 7, 2023, Hamas-led attack on Israel. Israeli military raids throughout the West Bank have also increased, with Palestinians killed or detained. Among the new barriers are metal gates stationed at many village and town entrances and between cities, blocking access in and out. Sometimes the Israeli military is stationed at them. Palestinians say the gates have erratic opening hours, with some staying shut for days. Some people sleep at friends' or relatives' homes or go around the gates on foot. During the first 2 weeks of September, the United Nations said it documented the installation of 18 gates in the West Bank. It said the gates and other obstacles, such as large earth mounds and concrete blocks, restrict Palestinians' freedom of movement and access to healthcare and education. The barriers are placed in the middle of roads, preventing cars from going around them. The new gates, some of which block roads connecting the northern and southern West Bank, force the territory's 3 million Palestinians to take long detours, with a 20-minute journey now taking more than an hour. Israel's military says the gates are not meant to restrict people but rather to manage and monitor. A military official, speaking on condition of anonymity in line with regulations, said its forces operate under a complex security reality in the West Bank, where militants embed themselves within the population and accordingly, there are dynamic checkpoints and ongoing efforts to monitor movement in various areas. Residents say some gates have been equipped with cameras. They also say the barriers have detrimental effects on their lives. Residents in the village of Aboud say the entry gates there are closed between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. every day, preventing students from going to university and people from going to work. It's all part of the occupation's strategy to destabilize the people's sense of security, said Mohammed Shalatway, a taxi driver. Others worry that the added barriers are a security risk. Ayad Jamil, a restaurant owner in the village of Sinjal, said every time his son goes to the main city of Ramallah, he's not sure he'll return.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Javed, let's start with the latest developments from the occupied Gaza Strip. Now, over the last few days, Israel has killed over 100 people, and most of them, as usual, are women and children. But Trump says that Israel has the right to attack. What are your views on that? Do you think that this ceasefire is going to continue like this? Trump says that the ceasefire is back in Gaza, but do you think that Israel is going to violate this again?
Well, I think what is the reality on the ground? The reality on the ground is that these are the pauses in the genocide. There is no ceasefire. Because had there been a ceasefire, 200 people so far would not have been killed and hundreds others would not have been injured. I think there have been more than 100 attacks since this so-called ceasefire agreement. What do you make sense of this ceasefire agreement when there is no letter to the killing of the people, when there is no letter to the atrocities being committed? I think this is a very systematic plan. This is a kind of a parallel plan that Netanyahu has been pursuing for years, and he's a determined, he's a hell-bent upon implementing it no matter what happens. Now, I think because of the pressure from Washington, more particularly from President Donald Trump, it looks like these are the pauses. And look at the reasons, look at the justifications with which the apartheid state have come up with, at least on the two occasions. In one particular case, they say that there are concerns from the family that the remains of their loved ones have not been handed over, and Hamas is playing politics. And then they are also blaming Hamas that the Hamas attacked and killed 2 of its soldiers. Why would Hamas attract aggression of Israel? It doesn't make sense. There are so many other factors which could be possible behind all these kind of what looks like a kind of a tiny false flag operation by Mossad, where the justification was created to carry out these attacks. Now again, once again, they are killing children, they are killing women. Where are the Hamas militants? They are not there. So I think we should not blindfolded ourselves. We should not be blindsided by a bigger reality, which is on the ground, that these are the pauses in the genocide. We don't know what exactly is going to happen, but certainly before the second phase of the ceasefire agreement starts off, I think that there's going to be crucial political decisions which are going to be made by the Muslim countries, more particularly Pakistan, because Pakistan has now lately indicated that it is at an advanced stage in its consultation to send its troops to the Gaza. Now, what is going to be the mandate of Pakistan? What is going to be the mandate of the other Muslim countries, more particularly of Egypt or more particularly of Indonesia? So I think before the second phase of the so-called ceasefire agreement starts off, Israel probably would have killed hundreds more Palestinians, and it would have caused much more suffering to the Palestinians. So I think this is where the real problem is, and we can understand why Donald Trump time and again is playing down, and other officials are playing down of what is happening in Gaza. The reason being is that Donald Trump doesn't have much options to deal with Netanyahu.
Javed, the Qatari Prime Minister has said that Hamas is ready to give up governance in Gaza. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, Hamas has a declared policy that it is willing to hand over power to a Palestinian coalition partners, and that would be built up. It would be cobbled together by all factions of the Palestinian. Hamas is not saying that it is going to disarm itself. Hamas is not going to is going to be ready in a position where it is going to be dismantled politically, socially, and more particularly militarily. So I think what I can foresee very obviously that the Hamas will be willing to hand over its part to the other Palestinian factions, and it will keep its military force intact. It will simply move inside the social fabric. It will stay there. Its cadres would be very much in the police. Its cadre would be very much whatever the shape of the paramilitary force which the Muslim country wants to build up. The bigger problem is that what will happen with the so-called peace board, which Donald Trump himself wants to head, and what is going to be its scope, and what is going to be its shape, and who's going to be the real governing authority in the occupied Gaza. And I think this is a very tricky situation. Once the remains of the dead bodies of the Israeli captors are handed back to the Israel, I think the real shape would start coming into onto the surface, that what will be the shape and what are the differences. And I don't think that Donald Trump has done sufficient homework on this, because at this particular point of time, many countries are reluctant to join this so-called international stabilization force, and they're pointing out that this is the time that the UN Security Council should be there, and there should be a resolution, the mandate should be determined. However, Israel, through USA, essentially is struggling hard that there should not be the Turkish troops, because they are very much doubtful for obvious reasons that the Turkish army would not undertake any step, any measure which go against the core interest of the Palestinian. Yes, the Turkey has an influence on Hamas, and many things can be done politically, and that is where Netanyahu has a problem. In case of Pakistan, frankly, there are a lot of speculation and there are a lot of lingering doubts to what an extent Pakistan can go, because in Pakistan there is not a representative government, a government which was literally selected by the powerful military through a widely rigged election. So in Pakistan, the sentiments are that the Pakistani military should not put its military foot on Gaza in a kind of a situation where it will have to confront militarily to Hamas. So I think the broader context is that Hamas would be willing to hand over power back to the Palestinian, not to any Western puppets who may be imposed onto Gaza.
Javed, talking about Pakistan, tell me about the latest developments from the ceasefire talks. Both of the delegations were in Istanbul over the weekend, but there was no agreement. So what are both of these sides demanding? How can we achieve a ceasefire there between Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Well, Pakistan says that Afghan delegations and interlocutors, they have agreed verbally on the demands Pakistan has come up with, and those demands are that if there are terrorist attacks inside Pakistan, more particularly on its southwestern and northwestern border, then there has to be a kind of a mechanism whereby Afghan government can be held accountable. And the interlocutors were saying that they cannot give any written guarantees, something Pakistan was insisting upon. Now, I think that is where there are lingering doubts in Pakistan that the Afghan government has some kind of a misleading ideological agenda where they are using some of the proxies, some of the militant groups who had sided with them in war against the Americans and the NATO forces. Now they might have some kind of ideological agenda to expand their brand of Islam onto the Pakistani side of the border, and they are not accepting the border between the two countries, because that was the demarcation made by the Britain about 150 years ago. And that is that they are also trying to make it an issue, despite the fact that it is a settled issue. But given that in the background, I think there is also a very tricky situation. And for Pakistan, reason is that India is also moving its military on Pakistan's border from the different direction. That is an indicator that India is essentially hoping that if there is a war between Afghanistan and Pakistan, of course, Afghan Taliban can launch insurgent attacks against Pakistan's airstrikes. So India can possibly intervene, can exploit the situation, because they are essentially trying to have some kind of revenge of what had happened with the New Delhi back in May this year, when Pakistan military had beaten up India in black and blue. So I think that is a very difficult scenario for Pakistan. There have been terrorist attacks, and there is no let up to the terrorist attacks inside Pakistan, despite these ceasefire agreement. But there is also another internal picture. The internal picture is that the people inside Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, they are simply fed up with the military operations. And more particularly during these days, and alone this year, there were more than 10,000 intelligence-based operations. And the people in Pakistan's bordering region, they are reporting that it has caused more collateral damages, which means actually the killing of so many innocent people, which the military would say that these are the terrorists, but as a matter of fact, they turn out to be the innocent people. So I think there is also, because of the intelligence gap, the military has not been able to hunt down the terrorists inside Pakistan. There are thousands of sleeper cells. So partly Pakistan has reasons to blame Afghan government because they are sheltering the leadership. But I think there is also a bigger problem, and that is that Pakistan needs to put its own house in order, because the provincial government is opposing any military operation on Pakistani side of the bordering region. Reason is that the people have simply fed up. In the past, there have been 4 million people who were internally displaced, and there were huge collateral damages.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you so much for that analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program. Dr. Mehmet Çelik, Daily Sabah's editorial coordinator, thank you so much for being with us in the studios. That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.